So now I've completed Attack on Titan 2. Yay me. For the most part, my first thoughts on the game did pretty well sum up the title, but I thought I'd give my final thoughts, seeing as how I finished the main story, and a decent chunk of the side content, and a bit of the post-game content. Once again, I'd like to express that I'm not really a fan of the manga or anime. I don't hate it or think it's god-awful or anything like that, I'm just simply indifferent toward it. And yet, I really enjoyed this game. As I said in my first thoughts, AOT 2 looks fantastic. It is a great representation of the source material. Not quite that source. There we go. Though there's a couple characters who look an occasionally bit off, most of them are pretty much dead on, and none of them look outright bad. The Titans too look fantastic. It also has quite a few little moments from the series that would often get left behind in an adaptation. My personal favorite is Oruo biting his tongue. This scene caught me off guard and left me laughing at how random it was, and actually made me go and look up to see if it was something that was in the source material. Nice adaptation job. I love little bits like this being recognized in a game. On the audio side of things, the game has the voices from the anime, but only the Japanese voice cast. I believe this was also the case with the first game, but I can't say for sure as I didn't play the first one. I have to admit, given the popularity of the series, I'm a little bit on the shocked side that it's Japanese voices only. It's not a big deal for the most part, but I would have liked a few of the battle lines to have been subtitled. Now, I have seen some people complain that the music isn't the same stuff used in the TV series. I can kind of understand this, but my personal thoughts? I don't really remember the music from what little I've seen of the anime, and I actually really like this game's soundtrack. Especially All Out Revenge. My goodness, that is a beautiful track. And a slightly different version of it plays during the game's opening, so hey, you heard it, you tell me. However, the game's translation is a bit lacking. While I think the writing itself is fine for the most part, there's more than a few lines that are a bit confusing, and it suffers from the same problem as the Dragon Ball Xenoverse games, where your character is often referred to as a male in every case. In the game's opening, this is somewhat justified in that someone else is reading your journal, which makes no mention of your character's gender. This would be a minor annoyance, but then it happens to major characters. Hanji is referred to as male, Connie is referred to as female, and I think Nanaba is referred to as male a few times. Luckily, despite these issues, the character banter is mostly excellent, with the exception of this weird thing that keeps coming up involving somebody, usually Levi, making a comment about people getting stuck on the toilet. Whether that's in the anime or manga, I don't really know. Now, as for the gameplay, as I thought back when I did my first thoughts, it's pretty mindless. It never really gets particularly difficult, at least on normal, and remains pretty manageable as long as you keep your gear up to date. At least for the most part. Through the way too many hours I spent before finishing the game, and there was a lot of grinding friendship that I probably didn't need to do, I only ever died twice, and both times it was on the same scout mission that I probably wasn't supposed to be on yet. The game doesn't lock scout mission progress behind story progress, so you can wind up taking missions that you're simply not ready for. The scout missions involved trying to take on 3 bizarre titans at the same time, and I was doing pretty paltry damage to them, one of them being the hyperactive, jumpy, small type that could basically kill me in 2 hits, with me not even being able to really evade the second hit half the time due to the massive number of normal titans running around and just getting stuck in trees constantly. I did manage to eventually beat it, but I'll admit I got a little aggravated with the sudden difficulty spike, considering the rest of the scout missions up to that point had been a cakewalk. There was also an instance where Erwin had me go on a mission with him as part of his friendship stuff, and I was woefully underpowered. While I mercifully didn't have to deal with anything as obnoxious as the small bizarre titan like the previous time, it still felt like it was supposed to be a mission for later on in the game, despite me being able to access it earlier than a lot of other personal quests. I wish there'd been some kind of recommended equipment level or anything to give me fair warning. Now you could argue the difficulty rating on the scout mission should have been a dead giveaway, but as I said before, everything up to that point had been an utter joke. For the record, scout missions are typically made up of 2 to 5 or so maps, and to the game's credit, you can leave in between missions without any penalty that I know of. But it doesn't give you any idea of what you'll be encountering on the next map, especially on the first run, since you'll only be able to see the first map of the bunch. Still, despite those slight annoyances, the game's mostly smooth sailing. Although, while I only died twice, I did fail a few other missions. Usually the protect the thing or save the citizens type missions. This only happened a few times, but hey, this was generally my fault. Though there were a few annoying times where they'd place a side objective too close to the main objective. I'd have to rush a protection mission because I accidentally triggered the main objective enemies while trying to help out someone sending out a distress signal. Again, just a minor annoyance, but noticeable just the same. It didn't happen too often, at least. As I said in the first thoughts video, the game is a bit on the repetitious side. And again, I think that's okay. It's repetitive for sure, but I never felt like I was bored, even if it did get exhausting grinding for friendship, and made me just want to continue with the main story. And honestly, just max out the friendship with the characters you like and then continue on with the plot. At some point, I gave up trying to max out everyone and just continued with the main story for a while, until meeting up with a new character whom I wanted to befriend. Because of the derpy way I did play, I wound up being a whopping level 99 before finishing the story. Between that and training, the game can feel like a bit of a grind. Still, the core gameplay is fun. It's fast-paced, and I love how the omnidirectional movement gear feels, even if I occasionally get stuck behind a wall, cliff, or tree. Spinning around an enemy and dropping from above to slice their necks felt just as good the last time I did it as it did the first time. It, however, can get increasingly frustrating when you're trying to kill a Titan or save a civilian or even just get from point A to point B when the game interrupts you. The first time you run into this potential aggravation is when you're made to protect a base, and every time it loses about 25% of its durability, the game stops you in place and shows the building falling apart, telling you to go protect it. Even if you're standing right there. It gets even worse when you get to the point where you can capture Titans alive, because you'll randomly get side objectives of scouts chasing down an escaped Titan, and it stops you in place to tell you about it. This wouldn't be so bad if you could skip it, and it didn't make you go straight to the ground, but these sequences are unskippable, and you'll always start back on the ground. If you were in the middle of a fight with a ton of enemies, this can be downright irritating since you'll still be surrounded, but now at a disadvantage because you'll have to make your way back into the air. I did, however, learn to really appreciate the bases, not just for refueling gas or replacing blades, but different ones have different uses. While I mostly just built mining bases for more resources, using attack bases in the post-game makes taking down durable enemies much less time-consuming, and auto turrets made handling crowds or protecting civilians and such so much easier. There's also some that auto-restore your gear, which is nice, but I never really found a need for it. The gear crafting and upgrading is okay. For the most part, you really don't need to worry about it until post-game, with the exception of upgrading your gear maybe once per chapter. You are at least given a pretty good arsenal of equipment to choose from, but I feel like a lot of it is useless or overly specialized. The ability to reinforce your gear is kinda cool though. It permanently increases your gear stats, though it does take a little while to get anywhere substantial. The skills you learn over the course of the game from your friends are also pretty great. While I think I would have preferred a typical attribute points at level up style for your main stats, I do really enjoy how useful many of the upgrades felt, especially what you learn from Levi. You start to learn stuff like chain attacks, counters, or fancier ways to deal death in general. And locking these abilities behind the Persona Social Link-esque friendship bits, I loved it. I'm a sucker for having character development done behind this kind of thing, and adding gameplay mechanics behind it makes it even better. While I didn't really care much for most of the cast when I watched parts of the anime, I dare say I became attached to these guys while playing this. I don't think there's a single one I disliked. Take note, Stimps. I really want to see this kind of stuff in Xenoverse 3, because damn it, I love your games, but Koei Tecmo really schooled you in CAC. or at least in terms of functionality. I am a bit disappointed with how very few outfits you get. It's basically just your uniform, and later on you can add a scout cloak to that. While you can change the top, I'm a bit bummed we don't get any sort of casual outfit for our protagonist. The face and body customization was absolutely exceptional, though. I will say, I like that you could play dress up with the main cast. Even without the somewhat pricey DLC, there's quite a few costumes for most of the characters. Sadly, some of the less important characters don't get alternate outfits, though. Also, while I'm mentioning this, can I just say that I really appreciate the minor characters getting to have a few cutscenes and such for raising their friendship? While I would have liked more, it was great getting to see characters who didn't have much presence in the main plot having at least a few moments to interact with the hero. I had no clue who Daz or Hitch were from my admittedly limited viewings of the anime, but I know who they are thanks to the game. That gives me a nice warm fuzzy feeling because they wound up being a couple of my favorite characters. Perhaps it's merely because it was easier for me to become attached to these characters through the view of my own character, but either way, I did become attached to a good chunk of the cast. There were characters who died I wasn't expecting to, and it left me a little shaken when I hadn't finished maxing out their friendship. Granted, there were still characters who felt like fodder, and basically were, but even they have friendships you can max post-game. Actually, can we just take a moment to appreciate this title's post-game content? While you can probably finish most of the scout missions before even beating the game or max out everyone's friendship, there's still more to come. First off, any Titan Shifter characters you met will be re-added to your team with their abilities intact, so fans can't bring along these guys and use their Titan abilities, as well as max out friendship if you missed it previously. That's something else I hadn't mentioned in my first thoughts. Probably because I hadn't gotten that far by the time of the recording, I don't think. When you have a Titan Shifter in your party, activating their assist skill has them transform, and you take control of them. I think this was a cool way to handle things, although I'm not sure where your character goes when your teammate is titaning around. I like to think my protagonist is just sitting on their shoulder chilling out like, okay, go beat the shit out of them, I'm a nap. Oh, but there's so much more than that. For one thing, there's the added Inferno mode. Now, I haven't touched this yet, but basically it's supposed to be a super hard difficulty, from what I've been told, and that it's supposed to actually get pretty rough. On the plus side, you get new upgrade materials, and your character can gain additional skill points to further deck your protagonist out for Titan slaughtering fun. But even story mode gets some nice new furnishings. For one thing, it unlocks dire eliminations. These are buffed up Titans who appear in both the main story missions and the scout missions, and eliminating them gets you some fancy upgrade materials. The other thing is something I mentioned I had heard about in the First Thoughts video, the ability to replay story missions and rescue party members who died. Personally, I wish this could have been done the first time around or after beating the missions at least once, something that could have had them re-added to the overall plot. However, it's still a nice option, and it does add a bit more to the game's running time. Which is good, because the actual main story is pretty short. It might have been better for them to wait just a little longer to release the game, given how Season 3 of the anime is starting to air in Japan in just a couple months. But, at the same time, I really did have a ton of fun with this game. As far as the story goes, I don't know how much is new to this game beyond, from what I've been told, the game's final mission. And yeah, that final mission is fantastic. The game's ending is absolutely beautiful. Whether the ending is ambiguously open or just wishful thinking is something I'm not entirely sure of, but damn was it a great way to cap off the story. And I'm not going to spoil it because that'd just be a dick move. I do think they should have just had the game's extra ending and skipped the first set of credits, however, because the first ending felt rushed and unfulfilling. And the final mission is literally immediately after that one, so it feels extra pointless. Sadly, despite the game having gotten a patch since I first played, they still haven't fixed the performance issues, or at least not entirely. I do think it's gotten a bit better in some of the chunkier sections than it was, but in more chaotic events, it does slow to a crawl still. They did, however, add the ability to turn off the slow motion when you kill a Titan, so if that bothered you, you're in luck. Still, I had a ton of fun with this game. It's the same kind of mindless fun as Dynasty Warriors. It's dumb, but this isn't really the type of game that calls for being complex. Is Attack on Titan 2 anywhere near a perfect 10 out of 10 Game of the Year type title? Nah, not even remotely. And considering how short the main story was, you may want to put it off until it's down to like $30, unless you're a major fan of the franchise. But hey, if you are a fan of the anime or manga, I definitely recommend it. If it gave a non-fan like me a good time, a fan of the series is going to have an utter blast. If you're someone simply looking for a game with an excellent custom protagonist, you're in really good hands here. I do still say the price is a bit steep overall, but there is a lot to like just the same. There are, of course, gripes to be found with the game, but in general, it's just fun. I kinda like to think the Dragon Ball Xenoverse series started a trend with its custom character, and that established franchises like this do a good job of taking notes. I do hope more games use the idea, but at the same time, I don't think every game warrants one. But hey, if you're gonna do it, Attack on Titan 2 is an exceptional example of how to do it. OC, please do not steal. Thank you guys so much for watching, whether you agree or disagree. Let's hope the trend of awesome anime games with customizable protagonists continues and only gets better. In the meantime, why not check out my first thoughts on this game if you haven't already? Or maybe check out my first thoughts on BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle.